Good afternoon. This is Film Fanatic live. This is Jason Dean live at come on live from Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. It is a beautiful day here on a Sunday. It's 1:48. So yeah, I wanted to do a show. I'm in the process of trying to figure out a plan because I really want to see this movie tonight. The new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, One Battle After Another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Benicio del Toro, and Sean Penn. And I'm really excited to see this movie. I'm a pretty big Paul Thomas Anderson fan. There's actually only one movie in his whole world of just amazing films that I haven't seen, and that was a film that came out a couple of years ago, I believe, or a few years ago now, Licorice Pizza, which I think stars Joaquin Phoenix. But I'm a huge fan of his body of work, and I think, you know, two movies that really come to mind. I mean, when you think of some of the movies he's made, I mean, just Boogie Nights, just a masterpiece of a film starring Mark Wahlberg. The Master, starring the great and late to great Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. Probably my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie, There Will Be Blood. The fantastic, iconic legend, Daniel Day-Lewis. And also Magnolia, which is another fantastic movie. And also a movie that I was so surprised, almost like it was almost the same kind of experience from when I first saw There Will Be Blood, where I was just like kind of shocked on how intense it was and how just the scope of it and just how original it was. Punch Drunk Love, starring, of all people, Adam Sandler. And I heard that this new film, One Battle After Another, is supposed to be really great. And again, I definitely get this feeling that it's one of those movies to see on the big screen. It's a real. It feels like it's going to be that. It's made for the theater experience. So we'll see. I'm trying to figure it out. I was almost going to go see it yesterday. Might go see it tonight. But I wanted to do a show about Paul Thomas Anderson just as a director. The first film I think I saw of his was Boogie Nights. And that movie, for all intents and purposes, I think is a masterpiece. Starring Mark Wahlberg. It came out in 1997 already, which is crazy. And it's a film that's essentially about the porn industry and kind of the dark underbelly of that movie. And I remember seeing that movie when it first came out. Burt Reynolds was also in it, just being floored about just how incredible that film was, the scope of it, and exploring the a subject that you haven't really that hasn't really been explored before, and showing a light to this darkness that the kind of the dark underbelly of that film. But that I remember that movie just being. I haven't seen it in a really long time. I don't really own. When I think of my collection of films, I have There Will Be Blood on DVD, which I need to get upgrade. That's essential to get. I'd love to get that on Blu-ray. And I think, yeah, it's weird. I don't, as much as I love Paul Thomas Anderson as a director, I don't really own any of his films. I'm not sure why, but I need to get an upgrade. Definitely, There Will Be Blood. Definitely need to get that on Blu-ray. And then Magnolia, another film which I remember seeing that in the theater. That came out in '99. Another extraordinary movie. Such an interesting narrative, and kind of where each there's like these independent stories within a big story, like almost like a vignette. Visually amazing, a very surrealistic film kind of going experience, but fantastic movie, fantastic movie. And with Paul Thomas Anderson's style, like he, I mean, when you think of his career and the films he's put out, everything, each movie is so different from one another. I mean, I think without a doubt, Paul Thomas Anderson has a very specific kind of style. And I've seen interviews with him over the years, and seen interviews with various actors that have worked with him, and they talk about his kind of loose structure into going into making a film. He really does leave room for areas of improv in a lot of his films. He definitely has a very strong concept, but he allows for this in the moment magic to happen when he is setting up a shot and with actors. And I've seen actors that have worked with him over the years of where they will talk about his kind of flexibility about adding a lot of new things, going, not being afraid to go off the rails a little bit. And I remember seeing Magnolia in the theater. I remember actually seeing it at the Colonial Theater. Boogie Nights, I think I saw on DVD when it came out. I know, in the 90s now. Another film of his that I saw, trying to think, trying to think of kind of the order of how I've seen his films. Well, I have to say the next movie that I saw of his, and I did see it in the theater, and I went into it totally cold. I remember it was, and again, I think it's probably my favorite of his work, and that is There Will Be Blood. What a masterpiece of a movie! And I that came out in, it's hard to believe, 2007 already. I I remember going to see that with a really good buddy, my friend Sean Russell, who was actually on this show as a guest a few years back. We At the time, he lived down in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and he was a Paul Thomas Anderson fan too, and he, of course, is a big Daniel Day Lewis fan. And he, I've talked about him being a big person for introducing me and getting me more into film. In college, especially in college, like I had always been a big movie fan, but it wasn't until when I was in college, and then after college, I started getting really, really into film. And he was one of those key players, if you will, one of those guys that really got me into movies. And I remember I had heard that at the time, 2007, when There Will Be Blood came out, that it was coming out and it was playing down at in his area, and I was going down to see him and hang out, stay at his apartment for a couple of days. He lived down in Portsmouth, which is about 4 hours, and we went into it. We were like, yeah, let's go see it. It's opening this weekend, and we went to go to this huge. I think it was like a big multiplex. I can't remember what it was, but it was a big theater. It was one of the first. It was the first time I'd ever been in a theater where they had stadium seating, and this was like one of the biggest theaters I'd ever been to at that time, and it was like it wasn't an IMAX theater, but it was close to that kind of feel. Like it was just a huge theater, that could hold hundreds of people, and it had a balcony, and it was just this amazing, beautiful theater. I can't remember the name of it, and it had just amazing sound. And we went into it totally cold, and I remember just being completely blown away by this movie, and a feeling of like being taken on a true journey. And I remember after we saw that film, we were both like kind of in this silence, this very silent space. Like it was a lot to kind of like process because the movie is super intense and it really, tackles um, evil, organized religion, societal problems, and class warfare, if you will. An amazing film. It's probably my favorite Daniel Day Lewis film to this date. And again, that's saying a lot because there's so many great films to his credit. But that movie, I think, remains to me today as probably being my favorite of his amazing body of work. So, and then a few years after that, the next movie I remember seeing of his that again I also really loved, and I was blown away by how Paul Thomas Anderson has a very kind of art house quality. He takes a deep dive in kind of the psychology of his characters, and he has this very grand scale look at his, like when he's creating worlds, true like world building minded director. The next movie I remember seeing of his was The Master, and I saw that on DVD, not VHS. I remember seeing that on DVD, and that film again was another movie that just it kind of moved me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and I was kind of blown away by that film. And that film it came out in 2012. I saw it on DVD, I believe. Starred Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. And that movie was like kind of a loose biopic, if you will, about the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. And it's a Paul Thomas Anderson's films always have this very kind of insane quality to them, where they do have this. There is this aspect to the films of where they get really they do get bonkers. They get pretty bonkers, and there's this. The narrative goes in these very kind of outrageous, crazy areas. And The Master is one of those movies. Philip Seymour Hoffman plays kind of a loose character of L. Ron Hubbard, and it's a wild ride. And I think, from what I have read about L. Ron Hubbard and the formation of the Church of Scientology and kind of what went into it, I feel like it's a loose biopic of his life or of him, of the man, but I think it's pretty accurate. It's a wild movie, and I remember just being kind of blown away by it as well. And I think it's one of his films that's not really talked about as much, but a really great film, especially if you're a fan of Philip Seymour Hoffman. I mean, he was such a great actor. It was such a tragedy when he passed away. And then Punch Drunk Love, which came out in 2002, starring Adam Sandler. This movie again totally surprised me and shocked me because I've never actually been a huge Adam Sandler fan. I like the Happy Gilmore film. I thought that's a pretty funny film. I thought when he was on SNL, pretty funny. But I was never a massive Adam Sandler fan. Never really took him too seriously as an actor. But Paul Thomas Anderson also has this thing where when he's working with actors, he really puts them in really unique places, and you see actors do things you thought they would never do or play roles they would never do. And this is a primetime example of that. This movie was such a dark character study of a person more or less kind of losing his reality. Incredible film, and it gave me a whole new respect for Adam Sandler as an actor. And since then, he's done some pretty good movies. Prime Cut Jewels, I think, is another film he did fairly recently, which is a really awesome movie. Really, really extraordinary film. Or let me see what that. just an incredible, incredible film. Uncut Gems. He did. Adam Sandler did this film in 2019. Fabulous movie. Punch Drunk Love really made me think completely differently of him as an actor and gave me a whole new found respect. And then shortly after that, I got to see Phantom Thread, also with Paul Thomas Anderson, which essentially is about the more or less kind of the early beginnings of the well, the seamstress, but then the fashion industry, also starring Daniel Day Lewis, and uh, such an incredible film. A movie that it's a pretty dry film, but when I saw it a second time, I really loved this film because there's all of this like bottled up agitation and energy throughout the film. But it's kind of a subtle but yet explosive film. Tremendous movie, a really really great film. And Paul Thomas Anderson has for quite a few films now has worked with Johnny Greenwood. Worked with Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, the famous guitar player from Radiohead, and he has scored a lot of his films. And he's a really amazing film soundtrack composer. So very excited to see this new movie. I'm going to go see it. One battle after another tonight. So stay tuned for a big review for that. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.